All right, so let's dive into this, shall we? UFOs, or as the government likes to call them these days, UAPs. Unidentified anomalous phenomena. You came with a lot of sources, mostly from Wikipedia, it seems. Looks like you want to really understand this whole thing. Like, where did it all start? What are people investigating now? And maybe even, why are we so obsessed with UFOs?
Yeah, it's a topic that's had people hooked for ages, right? And it seems like it just keeps getting more popular.
Totally. But before we jump into all that, maybe we should start with the basics. What exactly do we mean when we say UFO or UAP? Are those even different things?
Well, people tend to use them kind of interchangeably, but there's a slight difference. UFO, of course, means unidentified flying object, basically. Anything
Oh.
in the sky you can't immediately explain. But when the government switched to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, they kind of broadened it. It's not just about things flying in the air anymore, but also things underwater or even moving between, like, different environments.
So it's not just about little green men flying around in saucers then?
Not necessarily. It's more like acknowledging that there might be things out there we haven't even figured out how to categorize yet. But the main point is this. Just because something's unidentified doesn't mean it's aliens.
Huh. That's interesting. So are you saying most of these UFO sightings turn out to be like normal stuff that people just misinterpret?
Exactly. Most sightings end up being things like aircraft that someone didn't recognize, weather balloons, satellites, even those sky lanterns people light up at festivals.
Oh, yeah, those things. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I was reading on Wikipedia about how people sometimes mistake bright planets or meteors for UFOs, too. Can you imagine thinking you just saw a spaceship and it turns out to be Venus?
It happens way more than you think. There's actually a name for it, Venus syndrome. Our brains tend to fill in the blanks when we see something we don't understand, especially in the sky.
So we've got misidentified objects, weird light stuff, and maybe even our own imaginations running wild. But what about the sightings that people just can't explain? Aren't those the ones that keep this whole UFO mystery alive?
Absolutely. It's that small percentage of sightings that defy all the usual explanations.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that really get us thinking, the ones that make you ask, what if?
Okay, so let's get into those what if questions then. You mentioned that people have been seeing strange things in the sky forever. What were some of those early sightings like? I'm picturing cave drawings of spaceships.
Not quite spaceships, but the accounts actually go way further back than you might think. Ancient civilizations recorded all sorts of strange events in the sky, and they often interpreted them through, well, their own beliefs. Like comets and meteors were seen as omens,
Yeah.
messages from the gods.
That's really interesting. Like those ancient interpretations, comets as messages from the gods, it kind of connects to how we still look at UFOs today, doesn't it? Like we're
Yeah.
still looking for meaning in these things we can't explain, trying to connect them to something bigger than ourselves.
It really is a fascinating connection. I mean, we might have traded chariots for spaceships, but that basic human urge to understand the unknown, to find meaning in the extraordinary, that hasn't changed at all.
So, did the way people saw these things, did it change as we learn more about the world?
Oh, for sure. For instance, there's this woodcut from the 1500s. It depicts a celestial phenomenon over Nuremberg. Shows all kinds of weird stuff in the sky, like something you'd see in a UFO movie today. But back then, people thought it was a battle in heaven, a sign of God's anger.
Well, I guess if you didn't know what a sundog was, it would be pretty freaky. What about those mystery airships people talked about in the late 1800s? Those sound a bit more like our modern idea of UFOs, right?
There were tons of reports about those in the U.S. People saw airships with bright lights. Some even said they talked to the pilots. And this was like before the Wright brothers, remember?
Mhm.
So the whole idea of a human-made flying machine was still a big deal.
So people were already primed to believe that something amazing was happening up there. Makes you wonder if those reports were a mix of like actual sightings, misinterpretations, and that human desire for something, well, extraordinary.
That's a really good point, and it perfectly sets the stage for what happened in the 20th century. That's when things really took off.
Yeah, the 20th century feels like a huge turning point in all this UFO stuff. I'm guessing World War II had a lot to do with it, all that new technology and people being scared of what might be hiding in the skies.
Oh, absolutely. That's when we started getting reports of Foo Fighters, weird glowing balls of light that followed planes around, confused pilots on both sides of the war. Imagine seeing that while you're flying a combat mission.
Yeah.
Must have been terrifying.
And then, of course, there's 1947, the incident that basically put UFOs on the map, Kenneth Arnold, the whole flying saucers thing, the media going crazy. It feels like that's when the modern UFO era really began.
It's the event that gave us the image of the flying saucer, for sure. And it's interesting to think about how all those science fiction stories from earlier in the century might have influenced how people saw and described those objects. Suddenly, everyone was looking up, expecting to see something totally out of this world.
It's like a real-life example of how fiction can shape what we think is real, especially when it comes to something as mysterious and, well, awesome as UFOs.
Totally. And naturally, all of this got the attention of governments all over the world. If there were really unknown objects flying around, they had to figure out what was going on.
Which brings us to all those government investigations, right? Like Project Blue Book and all that. But before we get into that, so let's get into those government investigations, Project Blue Book, all that stuff. How did governments even approach this whole UFO thing? Were they taking it seriously? Or was it all just like swept under the rug?
Well, it's kind of complicated. It wasn't all one way or the other. There have been a bunch of official investigations over the years. Some were definitely more open about things than others. The U.S. especially has a long history of looking into UFOs. It started with Project Sign back in the late 40s, then Project Grudge, and of course, the super famous Project Blue Book.
Project Blue Book, that's the one everyone always brings up. What made it so important?
Well, it ran for a really long time, almost 20 years, from the 50s to the 60s, and they looked into over 12,000 UFO reports. It was huge. And while they said that most sightings could be explained away as, normal stuff that people just didn't recognize, a small number of them, those remained unexplained.
Hold on, even after all that investigating, they still had cases they couldn't figure out? That must have been frustrating, both for the investigators and for the people who reported seeing those things.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely kept the whole debate going. And it's one of the reasons why UFOs are still such a controversial topic. Some people think the government knows way more than they're saying, that they're hiding something.
I can see why people would think that, especially with those unsolved cases still out there. But did any of these government investigations ever find, like, real proof of alien activity?
That's the thing. Even with all the investigations, all the reports, all the speculation, no government ever officially said, yep, it's aliens. And I think that's part of why people are still so fascinated by it all, don't you?
Totally. It's like this giant cosmic question mark hanging over us. But what about those more recent things? Wasn't there some secret Pentagon program that got everyone talking, right?
You mean the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, ATIP. It came out in 2017. They were looking into military encounters with UAPs.
Wait, a secret program? What were they looking into specifically?
Some of the details are still kind of hush-hush, but they were basically analyzing reports from Navy pilots who ran into some strange objects, things that seemed to be doing impossible stuff in the air.
Okay, so we've got military pilots seeing things they can't explain, and a secret Pentagon program trying to make sense of it. Sounds like a movie.
It definitely got everyone's attention. And it led to that big report in 2021, the Pentagon UFO report. That was the first time the government officially acknowledged that a lot of these UAPs, they seem to be real physical objects, not just like glitches or people seeing things.
So even the government is saying they don't have all the answers. That's kind of a big deal, right? It feels like things are changing, like people are more open to taking this whole thing seriously.
Yeah, I think there's a growing realization that there might be something truly strange happening out there in our skies and oceans. And that brings us to the role of science in all this. Because if we want to understand these things, we have to approach them scientifically,
Makes sense. But I've always had the impression that scientists, like mainstream science, is a little hesitant to get involved with the UFO research. Why is that?
It's a tough question. But a lot of it comes down to the evidence, or the lack of it. Most UFO reports are based on what people say they saw. And eyewitness accounts, well, they can be unreliable, especially in situations where people are stressed or scared, our memories aren't perfect. They can be influenced by all sorts of things. So it's hard to know for sure if someone's telling you what they actually saw or if it's been twisted or exaggerated over time.
So even if someone truly believes they saw something amazing, it doesn't guarantee that they actually saw it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why science is so important. Scientists need data that can verify, observations that can be repeated, and ideas they can test. Eyewitness accounts, while they can be interesting starting points, they don't really meet those standards.
And to be fair, some of the explanations people come up with for UFOs, they can get pretty out there, right? It's not exactly making the whole field look more credible.
True. When you start talking about alien abductions and government conspiracies without any solid evidence, it can make it harder for real scientific research to happen.
Okay, so we have these eyewitness accounts that might not be totally accurate, and then we have explanations that sometimes sound a little speculative. But that doesn't mean all UFO research is automatically bogus, right? I mean, there are some scientists who are taking this seriously, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a growing movement to study UAPs in a more rigorous scientific way. There's the Galileo Project, for instance. It's led by Avi Loeb, an astrophysicist at Harvard. They're using all sorts of advanced techniques to actually look for evidence of alien technology.
So it's not just people sitting around speculating. They're actually out there looking for real proof. That's pretty cool. What about NASA? Haven't they gotten involved too?
Yep. NASA just announced they're putting together a team to study UAPs. They're going to focus on figuring out what data is already out there and how to collect more in the future, taking a data-driven approach, which is a good sign. They want to lay the groundwork for a more scientific understanding of all this.
It really feels like we're at a turning point in how we think about this whole UFO thing, moving away from all the secrecy and speculation towards a more open, evidence-based approach. But even with all this scientific stuff going on, there's still this huge cultural fascination with UFOs, isn't there? I mean, they're everywhere. Movies, TV, books, conspiracy theories, it's like they've become part of our mythology.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
UFOs have captured our imaginations in a way that few other things have.
Yeah.
They make us think about all the big questions, Are we alone? What else is out there? What if we're not the most advanced beings in the universe? Maybe that's why we keep coming back to this topic, even if we don't have all the answers yet.
I think you're right. There's something about the mystery that keeps us hooked. And who knows, maybe someday we'll actually have some solid answers.
I hope so.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the investigations, the science, but there's this whole other side to UFOs, right? It's not just about reports and data. It's about how we think about them, what they mean to us.
It's about how UFOs have become part of our culture. They're not just objects in the sky anymore. They're symbols, stories, reflections of our hopes and fears.
Exactly. And sometimes those fears can get a little out of control. All those conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, secret alien bases, experiments on people. It's like there's a conspiracy theory for everything.
Yeah, I think it shows a certain distrust of authority. This
Yeah.
idea that there are these powerful forces out there controlling things, doing things we don't know about.
And pop culture has definitely played a role in all this, hasn't it? Think about those old alien invasion movies from back in the day. They really tapped into that Cold War anxiety, the fear of the unknown other coming to get us.
Right. Those movies reflected the anxieties of the time, for sure. But they also kind of shaped how we saw the possibility of alien life. Aliens weren't just these abstract beings anymore. They were a potential threat, hiding among us, planning to take over.
It's crazy how those early portrayals still influence us today. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? There are plenty of movies and stories about aliens that are actually pretty positive.
Oh, absolutely. Movies like Close Encounters or E.T., they show a more optimistic view of alien contact where communication and understanding are possible, even between totally different cultures.
Those stories really tap into that human desire for connection, the hope that we're not alone in the universe. And they make us think about what that connection might look like, how different beings might interact and learn from each other.
It's a powerful message, and it goes way beyond movies. UFOs have found their way into music, art, literature, even video games. It's like they're woven into our imaginations, shaping how we see ourselves and our place in the universe.
It's this wild mix of science, speculation, and storytelling, and it all comes together to create this really rich and, well, evolving mythology around UFOs.
A mythology that, at its heart, asks some of the biggest questions we can ask. Who are we? Where do we come from? Are we alone?
And those are questions that each of us has to wrestle with on our own, right? There are no easy answers. But just asking those questions, exploring the possibilities, it can really change how you see things.
Totally. It forces us to look beyond our usual way of thinking, to question what we think we know, and to embrace the mystery of it all. And who knows, maybe that open-mindedness, that curiosity, is what will finally lead us to a real understanding of UFOs. Maybe even to contact with other intelligent life.
Well, this has been quite a journey. We've gone from ancient omens to modern investigations, from conspiracy theories to scientific hypotheses, and we've talked about how UFOs have captured our imaginations, how they make us ask the big questions about our place in the universe.
It's a topic that never gets old, and it feels like we're just getting started, like there's so much more to discover.
Yep, that's for sure. We may not have all the answers yet, but we've certainly given our listeners a lot to think about. So what do you think, listener? Where do you stand on all this? Are you more drawn to the scientific explanations, or are you fascinated by the cultural side of things? Or maybe a little bit of both?
Whatever you think, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking up at the stars. The universe is full of mysteries, and there's no telling what incredible things are still out there waiting to be discovered.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of all things UFO. Until next time, stay curious.